Hello everyone, my name is Kathy Rakusin and I am excited to be a guest artist for W+9. I have a bonus card on the blog, W+9, and I want to show you how I created this card on the right. I'm using Zig watercolor markers and the Christmas rose stamp. That's absolutely gorgeous, and I want to show you can use this stamp all year round. So here's the close-up. I want to show you my process. I'll be speeding up things that aren't important. Now here we go. I have some Tim Holtz watercolor paper and some India ink and black. And I want to show you that you can stamp off your MISTI. It does work. You have to push harder and your lines sometimes are a little bit thicker, but it works and that can be cleaned up later. So I've already gone ahead. I'm just putting a layer of distress ink down on the background, and this was a very long video, so I'm speeding some of this up. I feel like this isn't the important part of the video, so I'm just putting that first layer of color, kind of a wash. I've put a swipe of distress markers in this palette, and I added some water, and I'm just doing a wash of background color. Later at the very end, I'm going to add a little bit of colored pencil to get a little bit more richness in the corners, the nooks and crannies. So you'll get to see that. So I'm finished with the background, but I decided I just want a little bit more depth right here. So I'm just adding a line of color, and then I'm picking up some of the other blue and purple just to smooth that out and wash it into the center of the card panel here. And just a little bit here. You can always go back and add more color and more depth. Sometimes I suggest you use a heat gun in between. I wanted to show you, here's my bonus card, and then the center I've started some colored pencils, and you can really get so many different looks with this stamp set. Now right now I'm just using the lightest color of Zig markers that I have, and I'm determining where I want different colors. Just kind of laying it out, and it's just easier to put a first layer of color and figure out which leaves I want lighter, which ones I want darker, and which flowers are going to be different colors and stuff. So I'm grabbing the lightest pink, the lightest green, the lightest lavender that I have, and then I have like this peach skin tone color or something. Just grab any light color, and I'm just figuring it out where I want to put stuff. So I sped that up. Now this is where you get some of the depth on each petal. So I'm kind of drawing like an L shape on each petal with the Zig marker. My paper is dry, and what I like to do with Zigs is I draw that line of color, that L shape or whatever you want to call it. Then I go and dip my brush into my water, and I start on the pink part, the lightest part right there, and then I move that into the darker color, and I keep dabbing some of that color off because I want to save that sweet spot. I want a lighter area of my petal, and if I just pull all that darker color down, then it's kind of all one color. So the trick is taking some of that deeper color off your brush and then using water to bring that color down, because you always want a lighter and a darker area in my book. So here I'm doing it again, and then I'm going to speed it up because there's lots of flowers and leaves on this. So see how I wet the pink part there, then I dipped up into the darker purple. Now I'm doing the exact same thing here on these larger petals, except I'm doing like a upside down T shape on each petal, and then you'll see. Now since these petals are larger, I'm kind of keeping a petal in between, even though usually when I use Zigs I don't use that much water and I don't get a lot of bleeding from color to color. Now I dip my brush into the water. I started on the baby blue, and then I'm pulling that darker color down. And if I get too much of that darker blue on my brush, I dab it off on that towel. So you want to have that towel close by. Again, starting in the baby blue on dry paper. I always like to start with that first line of color on dry paper. You can always add more color if you're not saturating your whatever you're coloring or painting. Now I want to heat set this because I just thought it might be a good idea. So I tell people when they're using Copic markers or watercolors, don't be afraid to grab that heat gun if you feel like you're oversaturating or the lines are blurring. So I'm just doing some of the same here, starting in that baby blue area with a wet brush and then pulling that darker blue down. I think this way you have a much greater success of having that lighter area on your petals. So I hope you try this at home. It really works great. You could also take like the baby blue on top of this line, on top of the dark blue, and soften that. You would get a more intense color, but you could do that like if it's a larger area and there's more petal space, that works well too. And during my travels, I find a lot of people kind of struggle with zigs, and it seems like everyone has them. So I thought I would use the Zig markers for this video today. My blog is thedailymarker.com, and I do a lot of videos, and I love to color, and I love to share that with you. So I'm just working my way around these petals, and then I'm going to heat set this again, and I'll start on the other flowers. I'm going to do the same thing on all the flowers, leaves, and petals. So there'll be a series of times where I speed this up really fast because I've already shown it to you. And I know your time is precious, and it's actually better to watch and then to practice. So if you spend too much time watching, there's no time to practice. Now on these, I'm doing more like a C shape, but it doesn't matter where you put that line. You just want to have a darker area and a lighter area. And I'm the kind of person, I don't like to think where the light source is coming from. That's too stressful for me. I just kind of go for it. I just want a lighter and a darker spot. And I always call that lighter spot the sweet spot. Why not, right? If you can get a sweet spot, go for it, right? So I'm just going to finish this up, and then when everything's all dry, I decided, well, you'll see, now that I'm doing a voiceover, I can tell you that I decided to add some red colored pencil to these orange flowers, and you'll see that later. But I'm just telling you about it now. Now on the green leaves, I'm just doing the same thing, starting on that lighter area and bringing that color down, being sure to dab off some of that color so I just don't wash it all into the same color. So since I'm doing the same thing, I'm going to talk about the bonus card that's on the W+9 blog, and it's the exact same Christmas rose, exact same stamp. I stamped it Memento, and I take my Chameleon color pencils with me on the airplane. They're lightweight. I like the way the box stands up, and I like that you can get a hard edge on those pencils. So I just had fun playing around with that bonus card and using the colored pencils. A lot of times I'm doing the same thing on these yellow leaves here, but a lot of times, and I'm adding just a little bit of olive in those little nooks and crannies because I thought it would look good on that petal. So on all these yellow petals, I'm adding a third color in just the tiny little crevices. So anyway, back to the bonus card. When you're using colored pencils, it takes a while for the layers to come together. But it's fun to kind of recreate the leaves and reshape the leaves and add little ticks and nicks and stuff. So you'll see that card on the blog. So I do like to suggest, if you're using colored pencils, I know there's a lot of colored pencil fans, and I've discovered in my travels that, it just takes a long time. So I think it's great to use Copic colors, Copic markers or alcohol markers as a first layer of color, and then bring in your pencils. That way you save a lot of time, but you have that base color. And it works great with watercolors too. So feel free to mix your stuff up. Some of you probably already do, but it just adds a special richness. Now I've grabbed my Sharpie fine tip marker. I've been doing this since I started blogging since 2007. I find it very relaxing. You'll notice I start and just do a series of short lines, because I know some people are afraid to try this, but if you do a series of lines, you have a beginning and an end, and it's easy to have a steady hand for a short line. So this just makes the colors pop. Of course, it's not required, but it does make a difference. These colors are bright and bold, so it's not necessary. Now I have a Copic marker. I'm just scribbling some color in the center of those flowers. Now I've picked up my white gel pen, and I like to know that it's flowing, so I put it on my finger. It kind of warms it up. I see that it's pulling, and then I can add the dots to the center of the flowers. I was going to add some to the blue, and I decided not to. And I'm just using the black dots on those flowers as a guideline. Now I've picked up my purple pencil. It's a deep purple, and I'm just adding a little bit of color to those nooks and crannies. That's one of my top 10 coloring tips. It's amazing just adding a little bit of a dark color to a nook and cranny, how it can really enhance what you're coloring. And this is a textured paper, and when you use the colored pencil, it kind of picks up that texture, and it looks really cool in person. And you want to have a light hand when you're doing this, and it really doesn't take long at all, I promise. And one thing, if you get too much color, you can always use an eraser. So I'm kind of focusing in those little corners, and then I pull my pencil out ever so slightly, just like I did when I was watercoloring the petals. So I'm just focusing, going around the edges and then in the corners. Now also, sometimes when you're watercoloring, there's like a dead spot where the watercolor doesn't meet the line. This also fixes that, so it gives you a really nice finished look. And one thing I love to say is you will have much more success with the colored pencil if it's a really sharp tip. So I keep sharpening my pencil, and I edit that out just to save time, but I do sharpen it often. Now I'm going back, and I'm just doing a very, 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 very light wash of color just to pick up some of that texture, and then I'm turning my paper and doing it the other direction, and I'm just trying to have the edges darker, so the eye kind of comes to the center of the card. And this really is very quick, and honestly, I love the texture that it gives. Now, I decided to remove a little bit of that here, so I just grabbed an eraser, and you can just, play around. I love to play around. Now, one thing I'm big on and I love doing is adding dots on dots. So I'm taking my Sharpie fine tip marker, and I'm going on top of those white dots. And if I get a little bit of gel pen on that, I just scribble on the side. Now, my last tip and trick, I love to take a black colored pencil and just fill in some of those areas just in those little tiny nooks. It's very subtle, but it just enhances what you're coloring. And I've been doing a road trip, my coloring challenge road trip, and it just is amazing when people do this. And it's just like an aha moment, because this little teeny tiny thing really makes a difference. So I'm just kind of bebopping around my card, adding it to different little areas, those little nooks and crannies. It's the kind of thing you can walk away and come back to and just say, I want to add a little bit more here and more there. And then when I'm done with this, I'm going to take the chisel end of a Copic marker and I'm going to go around the edges. I just like to do that because then I like to mount it on white paper and this really stands out. And then there's the finished card, which you've seen before. I stamped a black sentiment and I went over it in white so it would pop with all the black accents in the back. And I added some foam tape, and that's it. So see you at the W+9 blog for my bonus card, and thank you for having me.